Welcome to the podcast on North American literature, hosted by the Research Group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada. I am Barbara, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Adrián Gordillo Carrasco, a student of English Studies here at the University of Granada. Adrián has recently completed a fascinating final project for our course in North American literature, in which he draws a powerful connection between two iconic works, The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe and A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Adrián, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and share some of the work I've been doing.
Let's begin by helping our listeners understand the aim of your essay. Could you tell us what your project was about and how you approached it?
Absolutely. My essay compares Poe's short story The Fall of the House of Usher and Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire, focusing on the theme of melancholy. I explore how both authors represent melancholy as something that shapes the characters, their environments, and the overall mood of the text. Even though they come from different time periods, Poe writing in the 19th century Gothic tradition and Williams in the Southern Gothic of the mid-20th century, I argue that there is a shared legacy, and that Williams' work is influenced by Poe's use of melancholy to depict psychological and social decay.
That's a really compelling idea. Let's start with Poe. Could you give our listeners a bit of context about the fall of the House of Usher and its place in American literature?
Sure. Poe wrote The Fall of the House of Usher in 1839 during the American Romantic period. It's a Gothic tale that explores madness, isolation, and supernatural horror. The story revolves around Roderick Usher, who lives in a decaying mansion with his twin sister Madeline. The house is more than a setting. It almost becomes a character itself, symbolizing Roderick's own mental collapse. Poe uses gloomy imagery, sound, and atmosphere to reflect psychological deterioration. He was a master at turning internal emotions into physical environments, and melancholy is central to that.
And what about Tennessee Williams? How does A Streetcar Named Desire compare?
Williams' play was written over a century later, in 1947, and is a key example of the Southern Gothic tradition. It tells the story of Blanche Dubois, a former school teacher who arrives at her sister Stella's apartment in New Orleans. Blanche carries with her a sense of loss, guilt, and trauma. She tries to preserve a sense of beauty and refinement in a world that's harsh and changing. Just like Roderick, Blanche experiences a mental breakdown, and her melancholy is shown through her fear of light, her illusions, and her sensitivity to her surroundings. Williams, like Poe, uses settings and symbolism to externalize inner despair.
All right, let's talk more about that. How do the setting in its work reflect the characters' mental states?
In both cases, the setting acts as a mirror of the character's inner world. Poe's Usher mansion is crumbling and isolated, with dark hallways and an eerie atmosphere. It represents Roderick's decaying mind. On the other hand, in Streetcar, the New Orleans apartment is small, noisy, and oppressive. Blanche feels trapped there, and the setting intensifies her sense of exposure and vulnerability. Both settings are claustrophobic, worn down, and filled with tension. They are not just backdrops. They shape the characters and deepen the melancholic tone of the narratives.
You also analyze aesthetic strategies in both texts, like imagery, sound, and lighting. Could you tell us more about that?
Of course, Poe uses vivid Gothic imagery, like the dark turn, the crumbling house, the eye-like windows, to reflect despair. Sound is important too. like the storm and the creaking of the house during Madeline's return. On the other hand, Williams take a more theatrical approach. He uses lighting symbolically. Blanche always avoid harsh light to hide her hacking and past. And the music, especially the Varsoviana polka, represents her trauma and emotional stability. The aesthetic choices allow both authors to create a melancholic atmosphere that's not just emotional but sensory and immersive.
It seems like there is a clear connection between the way Poe and Williams use melancholy. Would you say that Williams was darkly influenced by Poe?
I think so, yes. While Williams had many influences, the parallels with Poe's approach to melancholy are hard to ignore. Both writers create characters who are haunted by the past, unable to adapt to change, and ultimately consumed by their own sorrow. Both dramatize psychological collapse through space, sound, and mood. So I argue that Williams inherits and transforms Poe's legacy of melancholy, adapting it to a different historical and cultural moment.
Okay, Adrian, let's shift to the research process. How did you structure your essay and conduct your analysis?
I divided the essay into three analytical sections: one on melancholy as psychological decay, another on the symbolism of the settings, and a final one on aesthetic strategies. I used both primary texts and critical sources to support my points. I also used ChatGPT to generate initial ideas and organize my structure, though I always checked and revised everything to make sure it was accurate and academic. The final results combines literary close reading with critical discussion.
That's great! One of the goals of this assignment was to make academic research more accessible. How would you explain the significance of your project to someone who isn't studying literature?
I would say that this project shows how literature can help us understand emotional experiences like grief, loss, and mental health across time. Even though Poe and Williams wrote in very different contexts, they both explore how sorrow can overwhelm a person and change the way they experience the world. By comparing these works, we see how art captures human fragility, and that can still resonate with readers and audiences today.
You've talked about Williams innovating Poe's melancholic tone. Do you think this kind of literary legacy authors echoing or transforming the work of earlier writers is something we still see today?
Absolutely, yes. Literature is full of echoes even across centuries. Writers often build upon what came before, whether consciously or subconsciously. In the case of Poe and Williams, we see how Gothic elements evolve. Poe's dark romanticism becomes Southern Gothic in Williams' hands. Today, we can still find traces of these aesthetics in novels, films, and even in TV shows. Themes like psychological decay, trauma, or haunting settings are timeless, and modern authors continue to interpret them through new lenses.
Both Roderick and Blanche seem haunted by something, whether it's family history or personal trauma. How does memory function in this text, and what role does it play in the character's melancholia?
Memory is essential. For both characters, memory becomes a trap. Roderick is haunted by the ancestral legacy of his family, something inherited and inescapable. Blanche, on the other hand, is haunted by personal memories, her husband's suicide, the loss of Belle Reve, and her own perceived failures. In both cases, these memories aren't just past events. They actively shape how the characters live in the present, distorting reality and contributing to their collapse. Melancholy, in this sense, is memory turned inward, something they can escape or resolve.
If we think about today's world, do you think the themes in these works, melancholy, psychological breakdown, fear of change, still resonate with contemporary readers?
Definitely. In today's society, mental health is finally becoming a more open topic, and both Poe and Williams are ahead of their time in dramatizing inner suffering, the fear of change, the collapse of identity, or the feeling of not belonging. All of that still speaks to modern audiences. These characters may belong to another century, but their struggles feel very human and very current. That's one reason why revising these texts today can still be so powerful and meaningful.
Very well put. Before we wrap up, what would you say was the most surprising or rewarding part of this project for you?
For me, the most rewarding part was discovering the emotional and symbolic depth behind the settings and the aesthetics. I had always seen Poe as mainly a horror writer and Williams as a normal playwright about family conflict. But digging into the theme of melancholy helped me appreciate the complexity of their characters and their worlds when talking about the fall of the House of Usher and Streetcar Named Desire. It also made me realize how literature from different periods can speak to each other in powerful ways.
What interesting! You mentioned that both Poe and Williams construct their settings to reflect the characters' mental states. But beyond that, would you say that the settings themselves become characters in the narrative?
Yes, as I said before about the mansion, I would absolutely say that. As in the fall of the House of Usher, the mansion is more than just a backdrop. It's a living decaying force that mirrors possibilities, even causes Roderick breakdown. Fuses architecture with psychology, creating what some scholars called a psycho-architectural uncanny. Similarly, in Streetcar Named Desire, the New Orleans apartment feels increasingly oppressive as Blanche mines and ravels. The setting absorbs tension, noise, and light in ways that reflects her vulnerability. So in both cases, the space doesn't just reflect melancholy, it embodies it, acting like a silent yet powerful character in the story.
Your essay also includes a very modern element, the use of AI in your research process. What role did ChatGPT play in shaping your ideas, and what did you learn from using it critically?
That was one of the most innovative parts of the process. I used ChatGPT to brainstorm ideas and organize my structure. For instance, I targeted it questions like how melancholy connects with psychological collapse or setting symbolism. The AI helped generate connections I might not have considered at first, maybe, but I also had to be careful. Some of the citations it gave me were fabricated or inaccurate, so I learned to use it as a creative tool, not as a definitive source. I always double-checked facts and integrated scholarly sources from my own bibliography. In the end, it became a kind of thinking partner, but the critical analysis and academic validation had to come from me.
Adrian, your work has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us today. It's been a pleasure learning more about your project and the beautiful connections you have drawn between these two major works of American literature.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for appreciating my work. I really enjoyed this conversation very much.
Thank you. Thank you also to our listeners. Don't forget to check out more students' research on our channel. This has been a podcast from the Research Group Studies in American Literature and Culture at the University of Granada. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.